The chain-link gates of the rural animal shelter clanked shut behind the truck as it pulled into the lot. A soft wind stirred dust across the gravel, the late afternoon sun stretching long shadows across the yard. Inside the shelter, the air carried the familiar scent of antiseptic, old kibble, and nervous energy. In the final kennel at the far end of the corridor, away from the puppies and the adoptables, lay Rex. A large, battle-worn German shepherd with a jagged scar stretching across the left side of his muzzle. He did not bark. He did not whimper, but when anyone came close, he growled, low and deep. His golden eyes were wary, his body stiff with tension. The shelter staff kept their distance. Rex had been brought in 2 weeks earlier after a reported incident, a bite. Witnesses said he had lunged at a man in a park. What the report failed to emphasize was that the man had raised a stick, first, swinging it at the dog in frustration. Rex, starved and frightened, had reacted as any cornered animal might, but in the official paperwork, the word was clear: aggressive. Since then, no volunteer had been able to get a leash on him. One young woman had tried and been met with snapping jaws. From that moment forward, a large red sign was taped to his kennel: too dangerous, not for adoption. The shelter director, a middle-aged woman named Carol, stood outside the enclosure with a clipboard in hand, watching Rex as he paced in tight circles. Her expression was tired, conflicted. "He's not made progress," she said to the assistant beside her. "We can't keep him indefinitely. We're over capacity, and we have families asking for safe, trainable dogs." The assistant nodded. "What's the timeline?" Carol hesitated, then quietly said, 7 days. If no one comes forward, we file the euthanasia request." Inside the kennel, Rex froze, as if he sensed something had shifted. His ears flicked back. His eyes met Carol's briefly. He didn't growl this time. He only watched. Carol looked away. To the rest of the staff, Rex was already lost. A hopeless case. A liability. His history, his appearance, his behavior, it all pointed to one conclusion: unadoptable. But there was something in his eyes that refused to be ignored. It was not rage, it was not madness, it was fear, desperation. The same look seen in storm-shocked horses, in injured animals left behind. The look that said, "I do not know why this happened. I do not know how to fix it, but please, don't give up on me." The days passed slowly. Staff tossed food into the back corner of Rex's enclosure. He ate when no one watched, slept with one eye open. He never barked, unless someone tried to come near. On the 6th day, a new red stamp appeared on the paperwork attached to his kennel: scheduled for euthanasia. 24 hours. As Carol filed the form, her pen hovered for a moment. Then she signed. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the folder. That evening, the sun dipped behind the trees. The shelter grew quiet, the hallway dim. Rex curled into the corner of his kennel, nose tucked under his scarred leg. He shivered, not from cold, but from the weight of everything he could not understand. Out in the parking lot, a car pulled up. Inside sat a mother and her young daughter. The girl was blind. She did not know what Rex looked like, but soon she would be the only person who truly saw him. The air inside the shelter was thick with the scent of damp fur and disinfectant. The buzz of fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead as Sophie stepped carefully through the narrow corridor, her cane tapping gently against the linoleum floor. She was 11 years old, with light brown curls pulled back in a loose braid, and she walked with quiet confidence, though her eyes saw nothing. Beside her, her mother guided her gently with a hand at her back. "Remember, sweetheart," she said softly, "we're just looking today. You can take your time." "I'll know when it's the right one," Sophie replied, her voice calm and sure. They had come to the shelter seeking companionship. Ever since Sophie's father had passed away in a tragic car accident 6 months earlier, she had grown quieter, more withdrawn. Her therapist had suggested a dog. A steady, loving presence might help ground her again, give her someone to care for, someone to trust. A volunteer named Julia walked ahead of them. "We have several calm and well-trained dogs who might be a good fit," she said. "Some even have basic guide training. As they moved through the rows of kennels, dogs barked, whined, or wagged their tails. Sophie listened to them all. She paused at a few cages, knelt to feel a wet nose or a wagging tail, but something in her remained still, unmoved. Then they reached the last kennel. Julia stepped in front of Sophie quickly. "Let's skip this one," she said. "This dog's not available. He's scheduled to be euthanized tomorrow." "Why?" Sophie asked. "He's aggressive," Julia said, keeping her voice low. "Bit someone before. We can't take any risks." Sophie tilted her head. There was no barking, no growling, just silence. She took a step forward. "Sophie," her mother warned gently, "maybe we should keep looking." But the girl lifted a hand. "There's someone sad in here," she whispered. Julia blinked. "What?" Sophie moved closer. She crouched slightly, placing her palm flat against the cool metal bars of the kennel door. Inside, Rex raised his head. He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He stared at the small girl, ears flicking forward, body still. Sophie reached forward slowly, finding the edge of the bars. "Can I touch him?" she asked. "No," Julia said quickly. "It's not safe." But Sophie had already slipped her fingers through the space between the bars. Everyone froze. Rex stared. Then, slowly, he stood and walked forward. His movements were cautious, deliberate. As if unsure of his own decision, he reached Sophie's outstretched hand and lowered his head. The moment his muzzle touched her fingers, something changed. He exhaled, a soft, shuddering breath, then pressed closer. Sophie smiled. "He's not dangerous," she said quietly. "He's just scared." Julia's eyes were wide. Sophie's mother stood speechless, one hand over her mouth. "Chon mot concho," Sophie said. "This one, please." Julia looked at Carol, the shelter director, who had quietly entered the corridor, alerted by the unusual silence. Carol stared, stunned. "He's never let anyone touch him before," she whispered. After a long silence, Carol nodded. 30-day foster trial, she said. "We'll do a home check and behavioral monitor, but yes, he goes home with you." Sophie beamed. Rex rested his head against the bars, eyes closed, still pressed into the touch of the first kind hand he had felt in years, and the countdown to his death quietly disappeared. "Saved him once, sweetheart, and now he saved you." Sophie reached down, found Shadow's head, and smiled as she stroked behind his ears. "I knew you would," she whispered. "I knew." Back home, after the incident at the park, Sophie's mother sat at the kitchen table well into the night. Her hands trembled slightly over the keys of her laptop as she tried to put into words what had happened, what had been happening, for weeks. She titled the post simply, "The Dog Everyone Feared Until My Blind Daughter Saw Him." She wrote about Rex, the German shepherd with the scarred muzzle and the label of too dangerous. She wrote about how her daughter, blind since birth, had reached out when no one else would, how Shadow, his new name, had responded not with teeth or terror, but with quiet trust, and how that trust had grown into something powerful enough to protect her child's life. She hit publish. By morning, the story had spread farther than she ever imagined. Readers from across the country shared the post on social media. Animal lovers, parents of children with disabilities, veterans, educators, all commented with tears, awe, and gratitude. "This is why we never give up on anyone. She saw him not with her eyes, but with her heart. Sometimes it takes someone who cannot see to truly understand." The story was picked up by a popular human interest website, and from there local news stations called. Reporters arrived to film interviews with Sophie and Shadow. Sophie, in her gentle voice, told them plainly, "He wasn't scary. He was just alone." Shadow, calm in his new vest and harness, sat beside her with quiet dignity, no longer flinching at microphones or sudden noises. His presence alone spoke volumes. Among those who read the article was the director of a nationally recognized service animal training center. Moved by the story, the center reached out with a proposal. They offered to train Shadow at no cost in specialized therapy and emotional support work, tailored to children with sensory disabilities. Sophie's mother was stunned. "You would do that for him?" The director responded with a simple message. He already passed the hardest test of all. He loved without being asked to. Training began immediately. Over several weeks, Shadow worked with patient handlers to refine his reactions to sound cues, develop gentle tactile signals for Sophie, and build confidence around medical equipment and public spaces. Sophie attended every session, encouraging him with soft praise and her steady presence. When he completed his certification, the center held a small ceremony. Shadow wore a deep blue vest embroidered with gold thread. Therapy Dog, Certified Companion. From that day forward, Shadow and Sophie became something of a phenomenon, not for their fame, but for their purpose. They began visiting children's hospitals where young patients in wheelchairs reached out to pet the calm shepherd. They visited schools for the visually impaired, where Shadow gently nudged toys toward blind toddlers, or lay still during story time, offering warmth and comfort. They even returned to the very shelter where Shadow had once waited for death, speaking at an event for animal advocacy and second chances. Wherever they went, people smiled, cried, hugged them, not just because it was heartwarming, but because it was real. Sophie and Shadow had become symbols of quiet resilience, of how healing often begins not with sight, but with a touch, not with perfection, but with acceptance. And all of it, Sophie would later say, started with a moment of silence, a moment when no one else believed, but she reached out anyway. "I didn't need to see him to know he was good," she told a classroom of children one afternoon. "Sometimes you just have to feel the truth." Shadow lay at her feet, eyes closed, perfectly still. He didn't need to speak, to be heard. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon at Crestview School for the visually impaired. The hallways echoed with soft conversation and the tapping of canes as students made their way between classrooms. Sophie, now walking confidently with her therapy dog Shadow by her side, had just finished her reading session in the library. A slight change in schedule meant she would return to her homeroom alone, something she had done many times before. As always, Shadow followed quietly, his steps steady, his harness loop secured in Sophie's hand. But as they passed the stairwell near the science wing, a loud crash of metal startled them both. A janitor moving a tall cart had accidentally knocked a broom down the steps. The noise spooked Sophie just enough for her to misstep. Her foot slid. She reached for the rail, but missed. She tumbled forward, down 4 steps, before landing hard at the bottom. Her cane clattered beside her. Her elbow struck first, then her hip. She cried out, more from fear than pain, stunned and breathless. Shadow had not followed her down. He had halted, ears raised, nose twitching. In that single second, the instincts he had been trained to trust, and the ones born from something deeper, ignited. He spun around with a forceful bark. He ran back up the hallway, barking again, sharp, loud, unrelenting. He turned a corner, found a staff member exiting the copy room, barked again, this time jumping once to make contact. "What is it?" the woman asked, already following his lead. Shadow sprinted back toward the stairwell, pausing just long enough to make sure she was behind him. When they reached Sophie, she was seated on the landing, clutching her arm and breathing heavily. "Oh my God, Sophie!" Minutes later, the school nurse arrived, followed by Sophie's mother. A medical exam confirmed no broken bones, only deep bruises and a sprained wrist. But had she lain there much longer without help, her condition could have worsened. "She called for help," her mother said softly, stroking Sophie's hair, and Shadow answered. The school principal wrote an official letter of recognition. The local news, already familiar with Shadow's past, picked up the story once again. From dangerous to devoted, former shelter dog saves girl again. The footage showed Sophie, her wrist wrapped in a brace, sitting beside Shadow on the school lawn. Reporters asked her how she felt. Sophie smiled gently. He just knew, like he always does. A few weeks later, at a national conference for service animals, Shadow was named Service Dog of the Year. He sat tall on stage in his polished blue vest while the announcer told his story from a kennel marked for euthanasia to saving the life of a child, not once, but twice. When Sophie accepted the award on his behalf, She spoke only a few words. "I don't need to see him to know who he is." In the days that followed, messages poured in. Families from across the country wrote letters, thanking Sophie and Shadow for showing that labels can be wrong and that trust can heal even the most broken spirits. On a quiet Sunday morning, Sophie and Shadow walked through their favorite park. The trees rustled gently, birds sang, the sky above was pale gold. Sophie paused near the fountain, rested her hand on Shadow's head, and whispered, "I cannot see him, but I've never seen anyone so clearly." He nudged her hand, and they kept walking. Sometimes the world sees danger where there is only fear. It sees a scar, a label, a history, and turns away. But love sees deeper. Trust listens differently, and sometimes it takes someone who cannot see at all to recognize a soul worth saving. Shadow was once written off as too dangerous, but a blind girl named Sophie saw something no one else did. She reached out, he reached back, and together they redefined what it means to be seen, to be loved, and to belong. If this tale moved you, if you felt the tension, the heartbreak, and the triumph, please support our channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring more thrilling, emotional, and inspiring stories your way. Leave a comment below and let us know what you think. Do you believe dogs have an extraordinary sixth sense? Share your thoughts and personal stories with us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.